Dr. Timothy Bartell, and I wanted to kind of reintroduce this channel. We've had some new subscribers lately. It's a new year, 2024, and I want to talk a little bit about why this channel is called Knowing Poetry. So one of the reasons I started this channel, and you can look down in the videos from about a year ago to see my kind of brainstorming this new channel. One of the reasons I started this channel is because I really felt like poetry was something that people should and could know about, and that it's often something that people are often scared about, don't know a lot about, kind of see as daunting. Look, millions of people around the world know about and enjoy video games. Millions of people around the world know about and enjoy novels. Maybe you go pick up the new Suzanne Collins novel when it comes out. Maybe you, read mystery stories or read sci-fi. Maybe you love watching old films or love jazz. There are art forms that people think of as for everyone in our world. Jazz might be a good example of an art form. Opera might be similar to this, that people feel like is a little daunting. It's not for everyone. That's not true. I think just as a jazz musician or an opera singer would tell you, no, opera and jazz are for everyone. Poetry is for everyone. Poetry is something you can know. Poetry is something you can enjoy. Now, knowing poetry kind of has several different levels, I think. You can know about poetry. You can know about poets, whether it's Shakespeare or Sylvia Plath or A.E. Stallings or anyone in between. You could know about poetry. And one of the big reasons I make the kind of videos I make on this channel are just to let you know the kinds of poetry that have existed throughout history, the poets that I enjoy, that others enjoy, that you might enjoy too, and just kind of to raise awareness about poetry. That phrase, raise awareness, is overused, but I think poetry, especially poetry of the last 100 years, we're not very aware of in our culture. We're aware of big novelists, whether it's Stephen King or John Steinbeck or J.K. Rowling. Could you name 3 major poets of the last 50 years who have been important? Maybe not everyone can. And so this is one of the things that I feel like I can talk about on this channel, poetry that you should know about. Now, if you've watched this channel much, you know I like talking about ancient poetry. I like talking about medieval poetry. I like talking about modern poetry. I like talking about poetry by Babylonian princesses just as much as I like talking about poetry by American scholars. So I think knowing poetry is something that we can continually keep growing in. I'm still growing in knowing poetry. I think you, as someone who's watching this channel, who's interested in poetry, you can know poetry. But there's a second level of knowing poetry. We can look at an individual poem, and as we familiarize ourselves with the traditions of poetry, with the forms and styles of poetry, we can know what's going on in a poem. We can say, oh, that's a particular rhyme scheme I recognize, I've seen before. Oh, hey, here's an allusion to another poet. Oh, hey, here's a metrical structure that's very pleasing. Or even, there's an image that I see is using a metaphor to make the idea, make the color, make the emotional resonance more vivid. So I want to know about poetry in general and talk about how you can know more about poets and poetry in general, but also know what's going on in a poem. You know, you can read a mystery novel and say, that was too easy to guess who killed the victim. I've read mystery novels that did it better. And here's why I think they did it better. You could do that with a poem too. You could read a poem and say, hey, that was a pretty good sonnet, but you know what? It was missing this thing that I like in another sonnet. Or, oh, that haiku is doing something that's really lovely, and I can tell why. There's a third level of knowing in poetry, and that's, I think, that poetry itself can give us knowledge, can give us wisdom about the world. Now, this is something that I think we instinctively look for whenever we read. You want to learn stuff. Poetry, though, as an art form, has so much you can look at that you can just appreciate as a made object. You can get to know the poem itself. But poetry, whether it's Shakespeare's sonnets about, the turmoil of love, or whether it's Hopkins' poems about the beauty of the natural world, whether it's Longfellow's meditations on the nature of America, poetry can teach us truth. So knowing poetry means being aware of what's out there in the world of poetry. It means knowing what to look for in a poem and becoming more and more familiar with how poems work. But it can also be a path toward self-knowledge, knowledge of the world, knowledge of that which is and that which comes to be, to use an ancient philosophical way of talking. All these are things I want to think about and help people think about on this channel. And that's why it's called Knowing Poetry. Where do you start with poetry? Well, as it's a new year, I have a recommendation for you. If you're interested in reading poetry that I'm excited about, that's being written right now by people who I think you should pay attention to, This Afterlife by A.E. Stallings. It's a book of selected poems. It was published about a year ago. A.E. Stallings is the current Oxford Professor of Poetry. I'm going to talk more about the Oxford Professor of Poetry tradition in some upcoming videos. But if you want one recommendation for 2024, pick up This Afterlife by A.E. Stallings. I'll talk a little bit about some of the poems in it in future videos. If you want a reading challenge, read this book in 2024. It has sonnets, it has dream visions, it has close to free verse poems, and most of Stallings' poems aren't totally free. There's always some rhyme or meter going on. But I think this is a really good book to start with if you want to start knowing more about contemporary poetry. Pick up A.E. Stallings. Thanks so much for watching this channel. I hope you have a lovely new year. I'm looking forward to talking more about poetry in general, what's going on in poems in particular, and looking for the wisdom that's gained from poetry, the people have gained from poetry, from the ancient world to the modern. Thanks for hanging out with us.